A girl interrupts a live interview and shouts at the billionaire, "Give me back my mother." The accusation leaves everyone in the audience stunned and the billionaire silent. What the man does in the next few hours is truly surprising. The bright lights of the auditorium shone on Michael Thompson's perfectly pressed suit as he stood at the podium, his practiced smile never faltering. The audience hung on his every word as he described the latest philanthropic triumph of his foundation, a series of community centers in the city's poorest neighborhoods. Camera flashes punctuated his carefully prepared speech about giving back to society. "And that is why we at the Thompson Foundation believe in creating lasting change," he declared, his voice filled with authority and warmth. "Our latest initiative will provide opportunities for—" A commotion at the back of the auditorium interrupted his words. Security guards rushed forward, but they weren't fast enough to stop the small figure who slipped past them. A girl, no more than 7 years old, ran down the center aisle. Her tattered clothes and messy hair starkly contrasted with the elegant setting of the charity gala. "Give me back my mom," her clear voice echoed in the suddenly silent room. The girl's tear-filled but determined eyes locked onto Michael Thompson's face. "You took her away. Give her back." The audience collectively gasped. Michael's practiced smile faltered for the first time that evening. The girl climbed onto the stage, her small feet leaving dirty marks on the pristine carpet. "My mom worked for you," she continued, her voice breaking. "She said she had to tell the truth, and then she disappeared." Camera flashes erupted with renewed intensity. Michael stepped back from the podium, his composure cracking. I don't know what you're talking about," he stammered, desperately looking toward his security team. In the front row, Richard Thompson, Michael's brother, and the foundation's project manager frantically gestured to cut the live broadcast. But it was too late. Millions of viewers had already witnessed the scene unfolding on their screens. Among the shocked faces in the crowd, investigative journalist Sarah Chen leaned forward in her seat, her reporter instincts on high alert. She had been blacklisted by major publications after attempting to expose corruption among the city's elite. But something about the raw desperation of this girl struck a chord. Sarah's fingers flew across her phone screen, taking notes as the drama unfolded. The security team finally reached the stage, but they hesitated, unsure how to handle a tearful child in front of rolling cameras. The girl stood firm, her small fists clenched at her sides. "My mum's name is Eleanor Martin," she announced, her voice ringing clearly through the auditorium. "She worked in your big building, and she told me she had to tell the truth about the money. Then she disappeared." Michael Thompson's face had lost all color. He reached for the microphone, but his brother was already on the stage. Richard's smile seemed genuine as he approached the girl. Now, little one," he said, in a soothing tone, though his eyes were cold. "That's quite a story you've made up. Let's get you some help, okay?" But the girl pulled away from Richard's outstretched hand. "I'm not lying," she screamed. "My mum disappeared because of you, because of your foundation." Her voice broke with emotion. "I want my mom back." In the chaos that followed, as security finally intervened and the broadcast cut out, Sarah Chen's experienced eye noticed something curious. It wasn't Michael Thompson's shock that interested her. It seemed genuine enough. It was Richard Thompson's calculated response. The way his eyes darted between the little girl and the cameras, the slight tremor in his otherwise steady hands. The girl continued to struggle as she was carried away, her voice fading but no less determined. "I'll tell everyone. I'll keep telling everyone until my mum comes back." Sarah Chen slipped out of her seat and followed the commotion, her mind already racing with possibilities. After years of trying to expose the truth about the city's powerful elite, had this brave little girl just handed her the key to a story that could change everything? As the crowd buzzed with shocked whispers and speculation, Michael Thompson stood motionless on the podium, his carefully constructed world beginning to crumble around him. Behind the scenes, Richard Thompson was already on the phone, speaking in hushed but urgent tones. And somewhere in the building, the cries of a little girl searching for her mother echoed through the halls, a sound that would haunt the city's conscience for months to come. The evening air grew colder as Sophia Martin huddled in the shadow of an old building, clutching her worn-out backpack. The events at the Thompson Foundation Gala had left her exhausted, but she couldn't stop now. She had finally done what her mother had asked her to do, make people listen. But now she needed to find a safe place to hide. The streetlights cast long shadows as she ran along the narrow sidewalk, her small feet carrying her as fast as they could. Since her mother had disappeared, she had slept in various places, abandoned buildings, church entrances, anywhere she could find shelter. But tonight felt different. She felt eyes following her, and it made her skin crawl with fear. The sound of approaching footsteps made her duck into an alley. Her heart pounded as she pressed herself against the rough brick wall, trying to become invisible in the darkness. The footsteps passed by, and she let out a trembling breath. A warm light spilling from a basement window caught her attention. Through the glass, she could see an elderly woman bent over a sewing machine, her silver hair catching the lamplight as she worked. Something about the scene made her stop. Maybe it was the serene expression on the woman's face, or the way her hands moved so carefully over the fabric. Before she could think twice, Sophia found herself descending the narrow steps leading to the basement apartment door. Her mother had always told her not to talk to strangers, but she had also told her to trust her instincts. At that moment, her instincts were pulling her toward this quiet refuge. Her soft knock was barely audible over the hum of the sewing machine, but the woman immediately looked up. Their eyes met through the window, and for a moment, neither of them moved. Then the woman stood, her movements deliberate and careful, and walked toward the door. "Child, what are you doing out at this hour?" The woman's voice was gentle, with a slight accent that reminded Sophia of her grandmother. The name on the door read, Mrs. Rose Chen. I need help," Sophia whispered, her brave facade finally cracking. "Please." Mrs. Chen's eyes softened as she took in Sophia's appearance, the dirty clothes, the trembling lips, the desperate look in her eyes. Without another word, she opened the door wider and let the girl in. The apartment was small but tidy, filled with the comforting scent of fabric and tea. Spools of thread in every imaginable color lined the walls, and half-finished dresses hung on mannequins like graceful ballerinas frozen in time. "Sit down," Mrs. Chen said, pulling out a chair from a small kitchen table. "When was the last time you ate?" Sophia couldn't remember. Her stomach growled in response, and Mrs. Chen clicked, her tongue in disapproval. Soon, a bowl of hot soup appeared in front of her, along with a thick slice of bread. As Sophia ate, Mrs. Chen watched her with wise, patient eyes. "You're the girl from the news, aren't you? The one who disrupted the Thompson Foundation Gala?" Sophia nodded slowly, fear creeping back into her expression, but Mrs. Chen simply nodded in return. "My son was a journalist," she said quietly. "He believed in telling the truth no matter the cost." Something in her voice made Sophia look up sharply. There was pain there, and understanding. "Where is he now?" Sophia asked, though something told her she already knew the answer. Mrs. Chen's eyes grew distant. "He's gone," she said simply, "like your mother." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with shared grief. Sophia rummaged through her backpack and pulled out a worn notebook, her mother's diary. "My mum left this," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "She said if anything happened to her, I should show it to someone who could help." Mrs. Chen's hands trembled slightly as she accepted the notebook. As she began to read, her eyes widened. "Child," she said slowly, "this is very important information, very dangerous." "I know," Sophia replied, suddenly seeming much older than her 7 years. "That's why my mum disappeared. She found out about the bad things they were doing with the money for poor children." A knock at the door made both of them jump. Mrs. Chen quickly tucked the notebook into a drawer filled with sewing patterns. "Stay quiet," she whispered to Sophia, moving toward the door. But when she opened it, they didn't find a threat. They found an ally. Sarah Chen, the journalist from Phi. The gala stood on the threshold, her press badge still hanging around her neck. Her eyes widened in recognition as she saw Sophia. "Aunt Rose?" Sarah said, surprised. "I was looking for—" "Come in quickly," Mrs. Chen interrupted, pulling her niece inside and firmly closing the door. "It seems we all have a story to share." As the three of them sat around the small kitchen table, Sophia felt something she hadn't felt since her mother disappeared: hope. In this cozy basement apartment, surrounded by colorful threads and half-finished dresses, she had found not only a refuge, but allies in her quest for truth and justice. Dawn painted the city in soft hues as Mrs. Chen worked on her latest creation, a sunny yellow dress. Her skilled hands guided the fabric through the sewing machine, while Sophia watched, fascinated by how the pieces came together to form something beautiful. "My mum used to say that sometimes the strongest things are made from broken pieces," Sophia said softly, running her fingers along the seam of the dress in progress. Mrs. Chen smiled, not looking up from her work. "Your mother was a wise woman, like this dress. Each piece alone is just a scrap, but together—" She held up the partially finished garment. "Together, they tell a story." Sarah burst through the door, her face flushed with excitement. "The USB drive," she exclaimed, waving her laptop. "I decoded Eleanor's files. The Beacon project wasn't just about diverting funds. It was a cover for something much bigger." She set the laptop on the table, displaying spreadsheets and documents. The community centers were real, but they were only part of the story. Richard Thompson was using them to gather information on vulnerable families, especially single parents struggling to make ends meet. "But why?" asked Mrs. Chen, setting aside her sewing. "Because desperate people are easier to manipulate," interjected Mr. Rodriguez from his corner. The old custodian had stayed all night, sharing everything he remembered about Eleanor's final days at the foundation. "I cleaned the executive offices after hours. I heard things. I saw things. Richard Thompson made these offers to parents, giving up their children for special educational programs in exchange for money and opportunities abroad." Sophia's eyes widened. "Like what my mum found out?" Sarah nodded grimly. Eleanor discovered that these children weren't being placed in educational programs. They were sent to wealthy families around the world who wanted to adopt children but didn't want to wait through the normal channels. The foundation charged enormous sums for these private adoptions while making it look like charity work. "My mum said she had to stop them," Sophia whispered. "She said children aren't things to be bought and sold." Mrs. Chen wrapped an arm around the girl's shoulders. "And that's why she was so brave, sweetheart. That's why she left you these clues." A notification popped up on Sarah's laptop. Another leaked document had made its way to the media. This one revealed a pattern of families who had mysteriously left the country after enrolling their children in the Foundation's programs. The public reaction was immediate and explosive. Sarah's phone rang, a contact from the city's largest newspaper. After a brief conversation, she turned to the others, her eyes shining. "They want the full story, everything we've uncovered about the Beacon project." With Eleanor's documentation and Mr. Rodriguez's testimony, a sudden noise outside the window made them all jump. Through the glass, they caught a glimpse of a figure quickly retreating. Mrs. Chen immediately pulled Sophia away from the window, while Mr. Rodriguez hurried to check the street. "We're not safe here anymore," Sarah realized. "They know we're getting closer to the truth." Mrs. Chen was already in motion, gathering essential items into a bag. "I know where we can go," she said firmly. "An old friend owns a small hotel on the outskirts of the city. No security cameras, no questions asked." As they prepared to leave, Sophia retrieved her mother's journal from its hiding spot. Between the pages, a small photograph fell to the floor. Eleanor Martin standing proudly in front of the Thompson Foundation building on her first day of work, her eyes bright with hope and determination. Sophia picked up the photo, her small fingers tracing her mother's smile. "We'll finish what you started, Mom," she whispered. "We'll tell everyone the truth." In the growing light of morning, 4 unlikely allies left the basement apartment, carrying with them the evidence that could bring down one of the city's most powerful institutions. But somewhere in the shadows, others were moving, desperate to keep their secrets buried in darkness. The Seaside Haven Hotel lived up to its name, nestled along the coast like a time-worn sentinel. Its faded blue paint and salt-worn shutters gave it an air of forgotten elegance. Mrs. Chen's friend, Isabel Torres, greeted them at a side entrance, her face etched with concern. "Rose, when you called—" He stopped, observing the unusual group, an elderly seamstress, a discredited journalist, a former caretaker, and a child with ancient eyes. Well, let's just say I wasn't expecting such interesting guests. The room he led them to was on the top floor, with windows overlooking both the sea and the city skyline. 2 adjoining rooms provided enough space for everyone, though Sophia insisted on staying close to Mrs. Chen, who had become a sort of adoptive grandmother figure in the chaos. No one knows about these rooms, Isabella reassured them, handing over old-fashioned keys with brass numbers. They're not in the computer system. I use them for special situations. Sarah immediately turned on her laptop, connecting to a secure network through a series of proxies she had set up years ago during her investigations into corporate corruption. The evidence they had gathered was overwhelming, but she knew they needed more. Eleanor's files show that the Beacon project started small, she explained, spreading printouts on one of the beds. Just a few families at first, desperate people who wouldn't be missed, but then Richard Thompson got ambitious. Mr. Rodriguez nodded gravely. I remember when things changed. More security, new restricted areas in the building. Even Eleanor noticed. She started staying late checking the numbers. The community centers were the perfect cover, Sarah continued. They gave the foundation access to vulnerable families, maintaining a philanthropic facade. Richard could identify potential targets and approach them privately. Sophia, who had been quietly coloring in a notebook given to her by Mrs. Chen, suddenly spoke up. Mom was afraid of the numbers. All eyes turned to her. She said they didn't add up, but not like in math, like pieces of a puzzle that showed something ugly. Mrs. Chen sat down beside Sophia, gently stroking her hair. What else do you remember about your mother's work, sweetheart? She had a special box, Sophia said slowly, her brow furrowed in concentration. Under the floorboards of our apartment, she said if anything happened to her, I should count 300 sunsets before opening it. Sarah and Mrs. Chen exchanged a glance. 300 days, Sarah calculated. That would be next week. A knock at the door silenced them all. Isabella's voice came softly. Room service, and you need to see something. After carefully checking, they let her in. She carried a tray of food and a tablet displaying a breaking news report. Michael Thompson was holding an emergency press conference. In light of recent allegations, Michael was saying, his usual confident demeanor showing cracks, I am announcing a full, internal investigation into the operations of the Thompson Foundation. My commitment has always been to transparency, and the broadcast cut off abruptly. When it resumed a few seconds later, Richard Thompson was at the podium. My brother is unfortunately unwell, Richard announced casually. The stress of these baseless accusations has taken its toll. I will temporarily assume control of the foundation while he recovers. As for these ridiculous allegations, we categorically deny. Isabella muted the tablet's audio. There's more. My contact at the hospital says Michael Thompson has just been admitted for exhaustion, but there's something strange. He wasn't taken to a regular hospital. He's at Greenwood Private Clinic. The same clinic that runs the Foundation's medical programs, whispered Sarah. Richard is keeping him isolated. Mr. Rodriguez stood up abruptly, his face pale. Eleanor mentioned Greenwood last week. She said something about medical records that didn't make sense. Sophia tugged at Mrs. Rose Chen's sleeve. The box, she whispered. Mom's box. We need to get it now. It's too dangerous, protested Sarah. Your old apartment is probably being watched. But Sophia's eyes filled with tears. Mom said 300 sunsets. She said it was very important. Please. Mrs. Chen looked at the girl for a long moment, then turned to Isabel. Do you still have that van you use for hotel supplies? Isabel smiled slowly. The one with tinted windows and the fake company logo? Yes, I think I still have it. Then we need to make some plans, declared Mrs. Chen, her tailor's eye already calculating angles and possibilities. Sometimes the best way to hide is in plain sight. As the adults gathered to make plans, Sophia went back to coloring. But instead of drawing flowers or butterflies, she was carefully sketching a map, the path from the door of her old apartment to the loose floorboard under her mother's bed. where a box of secrets waited to change everything. The van rumbled through the morning traffic, its faded Coastal Fresh Linens logo drawing no attention. At the wheel, Isabel drove with ease, while Sarah sat beside her, dressed in a courier's uniform. In the back, hidden behind stacks of legitimate laundry bags, Mrs. Chen gave Sophia's appearance one last check. "Remember," whispered Mrs. Chen, smoothing Sophia's hair under a neat cap. "You're my granddaughter, and we're visiting my friend in apartment 3B. She adjusted the impeccable dress she had sewn all night, a perfect replica of the nearby private school's uniform. Mr. Rodriguez had stayed at the hotel, monitoring police frequencies through an old radio Isabel had kept. His voice came through, a secure phone line. "All quiet for now, no unusual activity reported in the target area." The van pulled into the delivery area behind Sophia's old building. Sarah stepped out, clipboard in hand, performing a well-rehearsed delivery protocol. Dance. She signed the building security guard's logbook, casually chatting about traffic and weather. Mrs. Chen and Sophia slipped out while the guard was distracted, entering through the residence entrance with a set of keys Isabel had somehow procured. They looked exactly like a grandmother taking her granddaughter home from school. The elevator ride to the third floor felt endless. Sophia clutched Mrs. Chen's hand tightly, her small body trembling slightly. The hallway was eerily familiar. Nothing had changed since the night her mother had told her to run and never look back. "Apartment 3B, Mrs. Chen announced cheerfully as they passed Sophia's old home, continuing down the hallway to maintain their cover. They knocked on the door of 3B, and right on cue, Isabel's other friend answered, an elderly woman who had been briefed on her role in their charade. As they were invited inside, Sarah's voice came through their hidden earpieces. "The security guard is on a coffee break. You have 12 minutes. Mrs. Chen and Sophia slipped back into the hallway. The old key to Sophia's apartment still worked. Eleanor had paid the rent 6 months in advance before disappearing, and no one had yet cleared out the space. The apartment was frozen in time. The dishes were still in the drying rack. Eleanor's coffee cup sat on the counter, with a faint trace of lipstick on the rim. Sophia moved like a sleepwalker toward her mother's bedroom, with Mrs. Chen following closely behind. "Under the bed," Sophia whispered, kneeling down. Her small fingers immediately found the loose floorboard. "Mom showed me once. She said it was our special secret." The hiding spot revealed a metal box, surprisingly heavy for its size. Sophia clutched it to her chest as tears streamed down her cheeks. "It's time to go, sweetheart," Mrs. Chen urged gently. "Sarah is waiting for us." They retraced their steps, reuniting with their friend in 3B and thanking her for the pleasant visit. The elevator ride down was tense, but Sophia remained calm, perfectly playing the role of the well-behaved student. They were almost to the fan when a familiar voice cut through the morning air. "Isn't this a nice surprise?" Richard Thompson stood at the building's entrance, 2 men in dark suits at his side. His smile was sharp. "Mrs. Chen, right? Our records show you were very close to Eleanor Martin." His eyes locked onto the metal box in Sophia's arms. "And what do we have here? A school project, perhaps?" Mrs. Chen stepped forward, positioning herself between Sophia and Richard. Her voice carried the weight of someone who had lost too much to still be afraid. "Mr. Thompson," she said calmly, "I don't believe we've been properly introduced, but your brother knew my son very well, before he, too, discovered things he wasn't supposed to know." Richard's smile faltered slightly. Behind him, Sarah emerged. From the van, phone in hand, live streaming every moment. Isabel's voice echoed in their earpieces. "Police scanners show 3 units responding to an anonymous tip about suspicious activity. ETA 2 minutes. Sophia, still clutching the box, looked at Richard Thompson. In that moment, she was every child who had ever been betrayed by those who were supposed to protect them. "My mom," she said clearly, "is stronger than you." The wail of approaching sirens filled the air. Richard's composure cracked as he realized he was being recorded. "This isn't over," he growled, stepping back. "That box contains enough evidence to destroy you," Sarah concluded, her phone still recording. "And now thousands of people have seen you trying to intimidate a child. Smile for the camera, Mr. Thompson. The world is watching." As the police cars rounded the corner, Richard and his men melted into the crowd. Mrs. Rose Chen hurried Sophia into the van, where Isabel was already starting the engine. "My brave, brave girl," Mrs. Chen whispered, holding Sophia tightly as they pulled away from the curb. "Your mother would be so proud." Sophia's hands trembled as she finally opened the box. Inside, beneath layers of documents and USB drives, was an envelope with her name written in her mother's elegant handwriting. And beneath it, a valid passport and a plane ticket to a small mountain town where Eleanor Martin had hidden, waiting for the right moment to reclaim her daughter and reveal the truth. Back safely at the Seaside Haven Hotel, Sophia sat cross-legged on the bed, her mother's letter trembling in her small hands. Mrs. Rose Chen sat beside her, a comforting presence as the child began to read. "My dear Sophia," the letter began, Eleanor's familiar handwriting bringing fresh tears to her daughter's eyes. "If you're reading this, you've been as brave as I knew you would be. There's so much I need to tell you, my love, and I hope you'll understand why I had to leave." Sarah and Mr. Rodriguez worked quietly in the background, examining the other contents of the box. USB drives, documents, and photographs were scattered across the small desk in the room, each piece adding another fragment to the puzzle they were reconstructing. "The Beacon project of the Thompson Foundation was never meant to help children," Eleanor's letter continued. "They were taking advantage of desperate families, promising them new lives abroad while separating them from their children. These children weren't being placed in schools or foster homes. They were being sold to wealthy families around the world, their stories erased and rewritten." Sophia looked up from the letter, her young face marked by an understanding beyond her. "Years. That's why Mum couldn't stay silent. She couldn't let them hurt other families." Sarah's voice interrupted the moment, tense with excitement. "These documents are incredible. Eleanor documented everything: payments, fake adoption papers, altered birth certificates. She even has proof of Richard Thompson's offshore accounts where the money was funneled. But that's not all," added Mr. Rodriguez, holding up a photograph. "Look who's in this photo from last year's foundation gala." The photo showed Richard Thompson shaking hands with a group of well-dressed people. In the background, partially obscured but unmistakable, was Michael Thompson. His expression, caught in a moment of distraction, clearly showed anguish as he watched his brother. "He knew," whispered Sarah. "Maybe not everything, but he knew something was wrong." Sophia had returned to her mother's letter, now reading aloud. "I found a safe place, my darling. A small mountain town where good people helped me build a new life for us. But I couldn't bring you with me right away. It wasn't safe. Richard Thompson's network is vast and I needed time to gather enough evidence to protect us both." Mrs. Chen gently squeezed Sophia's shoulder as the child continued reading. "Count 300 sunsets, my brave girl. By then, I'll have everything we need to stop them. The truth about the Beacon project will come out, and no other family will ever be separated again." Isabel entered the room, her face serious. "My contact at the Greenwood Private Clinic just called. Michael Thompson is being kept under heavy sedation. They're claiming he had a nervous breakdown, but the orders for his treatment came directly from Richard." "A classic power play," muttered Sarah, typing frantically on her laptop. "With Michael out of the picture, Richard has complete control of the foundation." Sophia's voice trembled as she read the final paragraphs. "The plane ticket in this box will bring you to me, but you must be careful. Trust Mrs. Chen. She's helped others like us before. Her son taught her the importance of standing up for the truth, no matter the cost." Mrs. Chen's eyes glistened with tears as Sophia looked at her questioningly. "My son," she explained, softly, "was investigating corruption in charitable organizations when he disappeared. He never got to publish his findings." "There's a P.S., Sophia announced, flipping the letter. Her face lit up as she read, "My dear daughter, do you remember the song I used to sing to you? Even if the night is dark and long, the dawn will bring a new song. Keep singing, my love. I will sing too, waiting for you to find me." The room fell silent as Sophia carefully folded the letter. Outside, storm clouds gathered over the sea, but in the hotel room a sense of determination had crystallized. They had the evidence, they had the truth, Now they just needed to figure out how to use it. The mountain town, Sarah said thoughtfully, examining the plane ticket. It's close to where Michael Thompson grew up. Eleanor chose that location on purpose. But we can't leave yet, Sophia declared, her chin set firmly. We need to help Mr. Michael first. He's trapped, just like my mum was. Mr. Rodriguez nodded slowly. The girl is right. We need to get Michael Thompson out of that clinic. He might be the key to bringing his brother to justice. Mrs. Rose Chen stood up, her movements deliberate and graceful. Then we have work to do. Isabel, we'll need your help again. And Sophia, she smiled at the girl who had become like a granddaughter to her. It's time to teach you how to create the perfect disguise. Sometimes the best way to fight the darkness is to become invisible within it. As they began to plan their next move, Sophia clutched her mother's letter to her heart. For the first time since she had entered that auditorium to confront Michael Thompson, she felt completely sure. Her mother was out there, waiting, and together they would make sure no other child had to scream for their parents in front of cameras and in different faces. The Greenwood Private Clinic stood amidst manicured gardens like a modernist castle, its glass walls reflecting the stormy sky. From their vantage point in Isabel's van, parked in a service area, Sarah and Mr. Rodriguez studied the building's floor plan on borrowed blueprints. Security is tight, Mr. Rodriguez observed, but not impenetrable. I worked as a maintenance man here too, back when the foundation started collaborating with the clinic. I know every service corridor and every supply room. Mrs. Chen sat at her portable sewing machine in the back of the van, putting the final touches on their disguises. She had transformed ordinary jumpsuits into perfect replicas of the clinic staff uniforms, complete with authentic-looking ID badges created from photos in Eleanor's files. Remember, Isabel warned, adjusting her earpiece, my contact says Michael is being held in the private wing on the 4th floor. They're rotating staff regularly to prevent anyone from spending too much time with him. Sophia watched the preparations from her spot next to Mrs. Chen, her mother's letter safely tucked into a hidden pocket of her new outfit. Mr. Michael looked sad, she said suddenly. In the photo, when he was looking at his brother, like he wanted to say something but couldn't. Sarah paused in her planning. Exactly, Sophia. He was trapped in a system he didn't fully understand, and when he realized what was happening, his brother had too much power, Mr. Rodriguez concluded. I've seen it happen. Michael questioned things, but Richard always had answers, made everything seem like it was under control. The plan they had devised was risky but simple. Mr. Rodriguez would go in first, using his knowledge of maintenance protocols to access the service areas. Sarah, dressed as a nurse, would create a diversion in the main reception area. Mrs. Chen and Isabel, posing as cleaning staff, would take care of the security cameras. And me? Asked Sophia, her voice small but determined. The adults exchanged glances. They had debated whether to leave her at the hotel, but Sophia had been adamant. My mom trusted me with her secrets, she had declared. I want to help Mr. Michael like she helped those families. Mrs. Chen smoothed her hair. You, my brave girl, have the most important task of all. You'll be our secret weapon, but only if everything else fails. The storm broke overhead as they put the plan into action. Mr. Rodriguez entered first, casually pushing a maintenance cart. The security guard barely glanced at his badge, more concerned about the bad weather than a routine check. Sarah entered 10 minutes later, wearing a borrowed nurse's uniform and walking with a confident stride that drew no attention. She carried a stack of files from Eleanor's box, evidence of the clinic's involvement in the Beacon project that would soon create the perfect distraction. Mrs. Chen and Isabel followed during a shift change, blending seamlessly with the rest of the cleaning staff. Sophia waited in the van, watching raindrops streak down the windows and softly humming her mother's song. Inside, the plan began to unfold. Sarah approached the main nurses' station, loudly demanding to speak with the administrator about irregularities in patient records. As the staff gathered to handle the situation, Mr. Rodriguez disabled the security cameras in the private wing using the codes found in Eleanor's files. Mrs. Chen and Isabel moved silently through the hallways, their cleaning cart concealing equipment that would allow them to bypass the electronic locks on Michael's door. But when they reached the private wing, they faced an unexpected obstacle. Richard Thompson stood in front of his brother's door arguing with a doctor. "He needs to be transferred," Richard was saying, his voice tense. "The press is asking too many questions about his condition. I've arranged for a private facility in Switzerland." The doctor's reply was cut off by a commotion from the main lobby. Sarah's distraction had worked, perhaps too well. Security alarms began to blare as evidence of the clinic's involvement in the Beacon project spread among the staff. Richard's phone buzzed insistently. As he stepped away to answer, Mrs. Rose Chen and Isabel seized the opportunity. They slipped into Michael's room, while the doctor was distracted by the growing chaos downstairs. Michael Thompson lay in a hospital bed, his usual polished appearance replaced by a vulnerable stillness. But as Mrs. Chen approached, his eyes opened, clear and alert despite the sedatives. "I know who you are," he whispered. "I remember your son's articles on charity fraud. I should have listened to him back then." "It's not too late to make things right," Mrs. Chen replied gently, beginning to disconnect the monitoring equipment. "We have Eleanor Martin's evidence, and there's someone very special waiting to help you tell the truth." Michael struggled to sit up. "Eleanor, I saw the signs, but I looked away. Her daughter, that brave little girl." A shadow appeared in the doorway. "I was wondering who would be foolish enough to attempt something like this." Richard's voice cut through the air like ice. "I must admit, though, I didn't expect a seamstress and a hotel manager to be my brother's saviors." But as Richard stepped into the room, another voice rang out, small, clear, and fearless. "And you were expecting me?" Sophia was in the hallway, her mother's letter held in her hand like a shield. Behind her, Sarah and Mr. Rodriguez blocked the passage, while the doctor, who had argued with Richard, watched with growing understanding. The moment hung in the air like a thread about to be cut, and in that moment, Michael Thompson finally found his voice. The neon lights of the hospital hallway cast sharp shadows as Michael Thompson rose from the bed, his hospital gown a stark contrast to his usual impeccable attire. His voice, though weakened by days of forced sedation, carried the weight of years of suppressed truth. "Enough, Richard," he said, steadying himself on the bed rail. "I've spent too long looking away, convincing myself that your explanations have made sense. But that little girl's cry for her mother awakened something in me that your drugs couldn't silence." Richard's practiced smile faltered. "Michael, you're not well. The stress of managing the foundation, these baseless accusations. You need rest, Care." "What he needs," interrupted Sophia, stepping forward with a courage that belied her small stature, "is to read my mom's evidence, all of it." The doctor, Dr. Sarah Williams, according to her badge, approached to check Michael's vitals. Her expression concerned. "Mr. Thompson has been kept under unnecessary sedation for days. As his doctor, I cannot allow—" "As his doctor," Richard interrupted smoothly, "you will do exactly what the Foundation's medical board orders, unless you want your involvement in certain special adoptions to become public knowledge." "Those documents are right here," announced Sarah Chen, holding up her phone, "along with evidence from every other doctor and administrator who helped the Beacon project cover its tracks." Eleanor Martin was very meticulous in her documentation. Chen stepped between Sophia and Richard, her elderly frame filling the space with a quiet strength. "It's not just your brother who's looked away for too long, Mr. Thompson, but sometimes it takes a child's voice to remind adults of their conscience." Through the windows, lightning flashes illuminated the scene, with sharp glows. The sound of hospital security approaching echoed in the stairwell. "Richard," said Michael, his voice now steadier, "do you remember what Dad said when he left us the Foundation? Power without purpose is nothing but poison." He took an unsteady step forward. "What purpose have you found in destroying families?" "Purpose?" Richard's composure cracked. "I made us powerful. While you played the philanthropist, I built an empire. Do you know how much people are willing to pay to skip years of adoption bureaucracy? How many politicians and celebrities now owe us favors because we helped them build their perfect families?" Sophia's soft voice cut through his justifications. "My mom says perfect families don't need to hurt other families to exist." The Security team burst through the stairwell door but froze at the scene before them. Dr. Williams raised a hand to stop them, her professional demeanor crystallizing into determination. "I would like to officially record my concerns regarding the involuntary hospitalization of Mr. Michael Thompson," she announced clearly, "and present evidence of medical negligence and coercion by the Foundation's board." Richard's hand moved toward his pocket, but Mr. Rodriguez was faster. The maintenance worker's strong grip seized Richard's wrist before he could reach what was later discovered to be a syringe filled with enough sedative to ensure Michael wouldn't tell any stories. "The police are already here," called Isabel from her position near the elevator, "and they're very interested in the contents of Eleanor Martin's files." Michael straightened to his full height, shrugging off the hospital gown to reveal the clothes Mrs. Chen had smuggled underneath. "Richard, you've used our family's legacy to destroy other families. You used my trust and our father's name to hurt innocent children." "I protected you," growled Richard. "I kept you in your comfortable bubble of charity galas and public photos while I did the work that made us untouchable." "No one is untouchable," declared Sophia, and now she held not only her mother's letter, but also a phone showing a live broadcast. Every word of Richard's confession had been transmitted to thousands of viewers. The police arrived to find Richard Thompson slumped in a chair, his mask of control finally shattered. Michael stood with an arm around Sophia's shoulders, offering whatever comfort he could to the girl who had helped him find his voice. As the officers led Richard away, Michael turned to the unlikely group that had orchestrated his rescue. "Thank you," he said simply. "To all of you, but especially to you, Sophia. Your courage reminded me what it feels like to be brave." Sophia looked at him with those young, wise eyes. "My mum is waiting for me in the mountains. Will you help me tell everyone the truth about the Beacon Project? The whole truth?" Michael knelt to her level despite his weakness. "Every last detail. And then we'll help find all the families that were separated. It's time to bring light to all the shadows my brother created." The storm outside was beginning to calm, its fury spent. But inside the hospital, another kind of storm was just beginning. One that would sweep away years of secrets and illuminate the truth that a brave girl and her determined mother had fought so hard to reveal. Dawn painted the hotel room with soft golden hues as Sophia carefully packed her few belongings. Her mother's letter, worn from countless readings, was placed in the special pocket Mrs. Chen had sewn into her new travel dress. The plane ticket to the mountain city felt like a promise in her small hands. Michael Thompson sat in the common area of the hotel suite, looking more like himself after a night of proper rest and a fresh suit delivered by his personal assistant. Spread out on the coffee table in front of him were Eleanor's files, each document telling another part of the story he had failed to see. "The Foundation's legal team will work tirelessly," he explained to Sarah Chen, who was preparing her article for publication. "We've already identified 38 families affected by the Beacon Project. My brother's personal accounts have been frozen, and we're setting up a fund to help reunite separated families." Mrs. Chen worked quietly at her sewing machine, finishing one last project before their journey. The rhythmic sound had become a comfort to all of them in recent days, a steady beat of hope and determination. The police found Richard's private records, reported Isabel, entering with fresh coffee for everyone. "They're building a solid case. Several clinic administrators have already agreed to testify in exchange for leniency." Sophia, who had been watching Mrs. Chen work, suddenly asked, "What will happen to the children, the ones who were sent away?" Michael set down the file he was reading. "We'll find them, Sophia, I promise you. The Foundation will use every resource to track them down and make things right. Some situations will be complicated, but every family deserves the truth and every child deserves to know their own story." "Like I got to know mine," Sophia said softly. "Even when it was hard, Mom made sure I knew the truth." Sarah's phone chimed with a notification. "The story is attracting international attention. Other organizations are under investigation for similar schemes. Your mother's evidence didn't just expose the Beacon Project, it's shedding light on problems across the entire private adoption sector." Mr. Rodriguez, who had been habitually gazing out the window, turned to join the conversation. Eleanor Martin had been building this case for months before she had to flee. She knew it was bigger than just the Thompson Foundation. She was right, Michael acknowledged, and she paid a heavy price for her integrity. He looked at Sophia with gentle eyes. But now, it's time to get your mother back. Mrs. Rose Chen finished sewing with an elegant gesture and showed her creation, a beautiful blanket, small enough to be carried on a journey. In its design, she had woven pieces from every dress she had made for Sophia during their time together. A memory blanket, she explained, wrapping it around Sophia's shoulders. So you'll always remember the family you built while searching for your mother. Sophia held the blanket tightly, breathing in its fresh, clean scent mixed with the familiar smell of Mrs. Chen's sewing room. You'll come with me, right? All of you? I'll be there, Michael promised. I need to personally apologize to your mother and offer her a new position, heading the Reformed Family Services Division of the Foundation if she's willing. Mrs. Chen and I will stay here initially, Sarah added, to help manage the investigation and support the other families, but we'll visit soon. Her eyes sparkled. After all, someone has to document the happy ending of this story. Isabel pulled out a set of car keys. The trip to the airport takes about an hour. If we leave now, we'll have time for breakfast before your flight. As they prepared to leave, Sophia paused in the center of the room, looking at each person in turn. The elderly seamstress who had become her grandmother, the journalist who had helped uncover the truth, the hotel manager who had offered them refuge, the maintenance worker who had protected them, and the businessman who had rediscovered his conscience. Each had played a crucial role in her journey. My mum's song was right, she declared. The night was dark and long, but the dawn brought a new song. Mrs. Rose Chen adjusted the blanket on Sophia's shoulders one last time. And what a beautiful song it is, dear. What a beautiful song it is. Together, they stepped out into the morning light, carrying with them the promise of reunions, reparations, and a foundation rebuilt on truth rather than secrets. Sophia softly hummed her mother's song, knowing that somewhere in the mountains, Eleanor Martin was humming it too, counting the minutes until she could hold her daughter again. The small regional airport buzzed with morning activity as Sophia clutched her backpack, which now held Mrs. Chen's memory blanket and her mother's precious letter. Michael Thompson walked beside her, carrying a briefcase full of documents that would help reunite other families separated by the Beacon Project. "Remember what I taught you," Mrs. Chen said softly, adjusting Sophia's coat one last time. "Keep your head high, your eyes clear, and your heart brave." The final goodbyes at security were emotional but quick. Sophia hugged each member of her makeshift family: Isabel, who had slipped extra snacks into her backpack; Mr. Rodriguez, who had taught her to be observant of her surroundings; Sarah, who had promised to write the most beautiful story about her mother's courage; and finally Mrs. Chen, who held her the longest. "My brave little seamstress," Mrs. Chen whispered, using the nickname she had given Sophia during their late-night sewing lessons. "You've stitched together so many broken pieces." As they passed through security, Sophia noticed how different Michael Thompson seemed now. The impeccable corporate mask was gone, replaced by something more genuine. He moved like someone who had finally set down a heavy burden. "Your mother's files proved that my brother had been running the Beacon Project for 5 years, he told her as they waited at the gate. "I kept ignoring the signs, telling myself that our charity work made up for any irregularities. I should have listened to Eleanor when she first raised her concerns." Sophia reflected on this with her characteristic wisdom. "Mom says that sometimes people don't want to see the bad things because then they have to do something about it. But seeing is the first step to fixing." Their small plane climbed through cotton-like clouds, leaving the city behind. Sophia pressed her face against the window, watching the landscape shift from urban sprawl to gentle hills, and finally to the majestic mountains that had protected her mother all these months. "Did you know," Michael said quietly, "that your mother first came to work at the foundation because of her training in child psychology? She specialized in helping children overcome trauma and separation. I think that's why she saw through the Beacon Project so quickly." Sophia nodded, remembering. How her mother always knew exactly what to say when she was scared or sad. "She understands children's hearts," she said simply. As they began their descent toward the small mountain airport, Michael shared more discoveries. "Your mother didn't just document the illegal adoptions. She created files on every child, on every family. She was building a way to find them all." The plane landed gently on the short runway, surrounded by pine-covered peaks. Sophia's heart began to race as they gathered their luggage and headed toward the terminal. According to Eleanor's letter, she would be waiting for them. The arrivals area of the small airport was almost empty, with only a few locals waiting for passengers. Sophia scanned the faces anxiously, clutching Mrs. Rose Chen's blanket for courage. And then, "Sophia?" The voice she had dreamed of hearing for so many nights. Sophia turned slowly, almost not daring to believe it. There, standing by a large window with the mountains as a backdrop, was Eleanor Martin. She looked different, her hair shorter, wearing simple country clothes instead of her usual work attire. But her eyes, filled with tears and love, were exactly as Sophia remembered them. Mother and daughter stood still for a moment, absorbing the sight of each other. Eleanor's hands trembled as she opened her arms, and Sophia ran to her, crossing those last few meters that had felt like an endless ocean for so many months. "My brave, brilliant girl," Eleanor whispered, holding her daughter tightly. "My perfect, precious daughter." Sophia breathed in the familiar scent of her mother, feeling the last piece of her world fall back into place. "I made it, Mom," she said into Eleanor's shoulder. "I kept singing our song, just like you told me to." Michael Thompson stepped aside, giving them space for their reunion. But Eleanor looked up, still holding Sophia, and spoke directly to him. "Thank you for bringing my daughter back to me safe and sound. And thank you for finally finding the courage to see the truth." "Mrs. Martin," Michael replied formally, "I owe you far more than an apology, but perhaps we could start with that, and then discuss how to make amends for everyone affected by the Beacon project." Eleanor stroked Sophia's hair, a gesture so familiar it brought fresh tears to both their eyes. "Yes," she said, "but first my daughter and I have 300 sunsets of hugs to catch up on." Hand in hand, they walked out of the terminal into the crisp mountain air. Sophia carried Mrs. Rose Chen's blanket on one arm, her mother's hand tightly clasped in the other. Behind them, Michael Thompson made calls to begin the Foundation's redemption. And all around, the mountains stood like ancient guardians, witnesses to a love that had overcome distance, fear, and silence to bring the truth to light. Eleanor's small mountain cottage was nestled among tall pines, its red door bright against the aged wood. A stream flowed behind the garden, its song blending with the wind through the trees. For Sophia, it felt like stepping into one of the fairy tales her mother used to read to her. "Welcome home, my love," said Eleanor, opening the door to reveal a cozy interior filled with books, soft blankets, and, most of all, photos of Sophia covering every wall. "You never stopped watching over me," whispered Sophia, gazing at the familiar images from her childhood. "Not for a single day," Eleanor confirmed, leading her daughter inside. "And I wrote to you every night, even if I couldn't send the letters." She pointed to a stack of notebooks on a shelf. "Would you like to read them?" Michael Thompson waited outside, giving mother and daughter the privacy they needed for their reunion. Through the window, they could see him strolling along the garden path, his phone pressed to his ear as he continued coordinating the transformation of the Foundation. Sophia showed her mother Mrs. Rose Chen's memory quilt, explaining how each piece told part of the story of her search. Eleanor ran her fingers over the careful stitching, tears now flowing freely. "Mrs. Chen lost her son because he was trying to expose corruption," Sophia explained. "But instead of hiding, she helped me find you. She said that sometimes the best way to honor a lost love is to help other love stories find their way home." Eleanor held her daughter tightly, breathing in her presence. "Tell me everything," she said, "every detail of how my brave little girl changed the world." They sat together on a worn couch, Sophia curled up against her mother's side, just like during their reading nights. She told Eleanor about the gala, Mrs. Chen's basement apartment, Sarah's determination to uncover the truth, and Isabel's clever plans. "And Mr. Rodriguez taught me to notice everything," Sophia added. He said that sometimes the most important clues are found in the quietest places, like when you taught me to recognize the creaky floorboard and count the sunsets. Eleanor kissed her daughter's forehead. I knew you'd understand. You've always been so perceptive, even as a little girl. That's why I left clues in ways only you would recognize. A knock at the door announced Michael's request to join them. He entered carrying his briefcase and a humble expression. Mrs. Martin, he began, I've spent the morning speaking with our legal team. The foundation is ready to offer you not only your old position, but a new role, leading our completely revamped family services division. We need someone with your integrity and expertise to help us set things right. Eleanor's arm tightened around Sophia. And what exactly would that entail? Complete autonomy, Michael replied. Her dedicated team and resources to track down every family affected by the Beacon project. We'll provide whatever support they need: legal aid, counseling, reunification services, educational support. The entire focus of the foundation will shift to healing the wounds my brother inflicted. And Richard? Eleanor asked calmly. He's facing multiple criminal charges, Michael confirmed. He's already offered to cooperate in exchange for leniency, which means we'll have access to all his documents. We can find every child, every family. Sophia looked at her mother. You could help other kids find their mums and dads, she said. Like I did with you. Eleanor was silent for a moment, reflecting. Finally, she said, I'll need to work mostly from here, at least for now. Sophia needs stability, and this community protected us when we needed it most. Of course, Michael readily agreed. We'll set up a satellite office in the city. In fact, this location could become a retreat center for families during the reunification process, a quiet place where we can reconnect. Outside, the mountain air had grown crisp as evening approached. Sophia walked over to the window, watching. The sun paint the peaks with shades of gold and pink. Mom, she called softly, it's sunset number 300. Eleanor joined her daughter at the window, wrapping her in a warm embrace. It is, my love. And look, it's the most beautiful one yet. As mother and daughter stood silhouetted against the fading light, Michael Thompson quietly excused himself. He had his own journey of redemption to begin, inspired by the courage of a woman who refused to be silenced and a little girl who never stopped believing in the power of truth. Later that evening, in Sophia's new bedroom with its ceiling painted like a starry sky, Eleanor tucked her daughter into bed. Mrs. Rose Chen's commemorative quilt lay across the covers, each piece now part of their shared story. Mom, Sophia murmured sleepily, can we sing our song? Eleanor's voice joined her daughter's in the familiar melody. Even if the night is dark and long, the dawn will bring a new song. The simple tune filled the cozy room, carrying with it the promise of all the tomorrows they would face together. Outside their mountain retreat, the wheels were already in motion. Sarah Chen was writing the story that would inspire other families to come forward. Mrs. Rose Chen was preparing her basement apartment to offer shelter to those in need of a safe place. And across the country, other children would soon discover that their long-lost families were searching for them, guided by the light of truth that one brave little girl had helped ignite. A month after the reunion, Eleanor's mountain cottage had become the heart of something extraordinary. The small living room now housed a state-of-the-art computer system, donated by the renewed Thompson Foundation, which helped track down and reunite separated families. Photos of happy reunions had begun to line the walls alongside Sophia's. Another success story, Eleanor announced one morning, hanging a new photograph. It showed a young boy hugging his father in front of the cottage's red door. Sophia, doing her homework at the kitchen table, looked up with a radiant smile. That's Tommy and his dad, right? The ones from Brazil? She asked, remembering the family who had stayed with them the previous week. Yes, sweetheart. Thanks to your mother's detailed records, we were able to find them, confirmed Michael Thompson from his makeshift office on the converted porch. He spent 3 days a week at the mountain retreat, coordinating the Foundation's rehabilitation efforts. Sarah Chen's investigation had sparked a global movement. Her article, titled "The Girl Who Uncovered the Truth," had gone viral, encouraging other whistleblowers to come forward. Similar schemes in other organizations were being uncovered and dismantled. The backyard garden had blossomed into a healing space. Eleanor had hired local craftsmen to build comfortable seating areas where families could talk, process their experiences, and begin to rebuild their bonds. The gentle music of the stream provided a soothing backdrop for difficult conversations. "Mrs. Martin," called Michael's assistant from the front door, "Mrs. Chen is on a video call." They gathered around the computer screen to see the familiar face of the elderly seamstress. Behind her, her basement apartment was visible, now serving as a temporary shelter for families in transition. "My dears," Mrs. Chen smiled, "wait until you see what arrived today." She held up a stack of official-looking documents. "The government has approved our proposal. The old Thompson Foundation community centers will be converted into family reunification centers with proper oversight and transparency." Sophia bounced excitedly in her chair. "Does that mean more families will be able to find each other?" "Exactly, my brave little seamstress," Mrs. Chen replied, using her special nickname for Sophia. "And guess what? Isabel's hotel will officially collaborate with us to provide safe accommodations for families during the reunification process." Eleanor squeezed her daughter's shoulders, proud of how Sophia had maintained close ties with the people who had helped them. Every week they received packages from Mrs. Rose Chen containing new clothes for the families staying with them, each piece sewn with the same care as Sophia's memory quilt. "How's the new security system working?" Mr. Rodriguez's voice echoed as he appeared behind Mrs. Chen. After the truth about the Beacon project had come to light, he had been hired as the Foundation's head of security, ensuring no other child would be secretly separated from their family. "Perfectly," replied Michael, "and the renovation plans for the Mountain Retreat Center are almost complete. By spring, we'll be able to help even more families." The expansion plans included adding several small cabins to the property, allowing more families to stay during the reunification process. Eleanor had insisted on maintaining the cozy, homey atmosphere that made the mountain retreat special. "Sarah's latest article is making waves," Mrs. Chen added. 3 more organizations have volunteered to open their adoption records for review. They want to show they're doing things the right way. Sophia, who had been quietly drawing while listening to the adults, held up her artwork. It depicted the little house surrounded by smiling families, with her mother's song carefully written in the sky. "Even if the night is dark and long, the dawn will bring a new song." "It's beautiful, sweetheart," said Eleanor, admiring her daughter's drawing. "Would you like to hang it in the welcome room for our new families?" The welcome room had been Sophia's idea, a warm, inviting space where newly reunited families could find comfort and hope. The walls were covered with children's drawings, letters of encouragement, and photos of successful reunions. "Speaking of new families," Michael interjected gently, "we've located another group. They'll be arriving next week." He handed Eleanor a folder. "This case is particularly special." Eleanor examined the documents, her eyes widening. These children, they were among the first cases Richard handled, before the Beacon project even had a name. "Yes," Michael confirmed. "When Richard began working with the authorities, he provided records dating back further than we imagined. These families have been separated for nearly a decade." Sophia leaned over to look at the folder from her mother's shoulder. "But we can help them now, right? Like everyone helped us?" Eleanor hugged her daughter tightly. "Yes, my love, that's exactly what we'll do." Through the window, they could see the mountain peaks standing strong against the blue sky. Just as they had protected Eleanor during her months in hiding, they now watched over countless families, beginning their journeys of healing and reunion. A new photo joined the others on the wall, Sophia and Eleanor on the day of their reunion. Their faces glowing with joy, Mrs. Rose Chen's memory quilt wrapped around them both. Beside it, Sophia had pinned her mother's letter, her words a testament to the power of love and truth. "Keep singing, my love. I'll sing too." The mountain town had embraced its new role as a sanctuary for reunited families. Local businesses displayed welcome signs in multiple languages, and residents often left home-cooked meals at Eleanor's house. Sophia had become something of a local celebrity, known for her gentle way of helping other children adjust to their new circumstances. On a crisp autumn morning, Sophia sat with a newly arrived girl named Mia in the reading corner of the house. Mia hadn't spoken since reuniting with her father the day before, but Sophia knew from experience that sometimes silence needs its own space to heal. "Would you like to see my memory quilt?" Sophia asked softly, spreading Mrs. Rose Chen's creation over their laps. "Each piece tells a part of my story, like this one. It's from the dress I wore when I first met Mrs. Rose Chen, and this one is from the day I found my mom again." Mia hesitantly touched the fabric, then pointed to a bright yellow piece. Sophia smiled encouragingly. "That's from the dress Mrs. Rose Chen made for my first day at the mountain school. Would you like to hear the story?" In her nearby office, Eleanor watched the interaction while speaking quietly with Mia's father. "Children process reunions differently," she explained. "Sophia has become very good at helping them find their voice again." "Your daughter is extraordinary," Mia's father said, his voice filled with emotion. "When I saw her story on the news, it gave me the courage to finally come forward, to admit that I had been forced to give up my daughter with the promise of a better life for her." Eleanor nodded understandingly. It was Richard Thompson's tactic, exploiting parents' desire to give their children more than they could provide. But he never understood that love is worth more than any luxury. Outside, Michael Thompson was showing an entrepreneur the plans for the new family cottages. The design incorporated suggestions from families who had stayed with them before, private spaces to reconnect, combined with shared areas to bond and heal together. "The Foundation's board has approved additional funding," Michael announced, joining Eleanor and Mia's father. "We can expand our support services to include long-term educational assistance for the children and career development for parents who lost opportunities while searching for their families." Sophia and Mia appeared at the door, the memory quilt draped over their shoulders like a cape. "Mia wants to know if she can learn to sew like Mrs. Chen," Sophia said, beaming as Mia nodded shyly. "Of course," Eleanor smiled. "Mrs. Chen will be here next week to teach a special class. She says sewing helps heal hearts by stitching the pieces back together." The transformation of the Thompson Foundation had inspired other organizations to examine their practices. Sarah Chen's ongoing investigation had led to a proposal for new legislation to strengthen oversight of international adoptions and protect vulnerable families. "We've received another letter from the United Nations," Michael mentioned, checking his tablet. "They're interested in using our reunion program as a model for similar initiatives worldwide." Sophia overheard this and tugged on her mother's sleeve. "Does that mean more families will be reunited, like we were?" "Exactly, sweetheart," Eleanor confirmed. "Your courage started something much bigger than we could have imagined." Later that afternoon, Sophia showed Mia the welcome room, now filled with even more artwork and photos. In one corner was a new addition, a beautiful handmade mailbox where children could leave messages of hope for future families who would come to the mountain retreat. "I was scared too," Sophia told Mia as they looked at the photos. "But my mom taught me that being brave doesn't mean not being afraid. It means doing what's right even when you're scared." Mia picked up a crayon and a piece of paper, writing her first words since arriving. "I want to be brave too." The mountain air carried the scent of pine and burning wood as families gathered for the retreat's weekly community dinner. Local residents mingled with visiting families, sharing food and stories. The sound of different languages blended with laughter and music. In the cozy cottage kitchen, Eleanor prepared to teach her popular cooking class, another way she helped families rebuild bonds through shared activities. Sophia assisted by setting out ingredients, proud to be her mother's helper, in creating not just meals but moments of joy for others. "Mom," Sophia said as they worked side by side, "remember when you said the truth is like a seed, that it takes brave people to plant it and patient people to let it grow?" Eleanor paused in her preparations, moved by the memory of her daughter. "Yes, I remember, my love." "Well," continued Sophia, pointing to the window where families could be seen gathering, "I think our garden is growing very well." Through the window, the setting sun painted the mountains with shades of hope. "It's Light touching every face gathered in the garden, faces that had once been separated by darkness, but were now illuminated by the courage of a little girl who had refused to let the truth remain hidden. Winter had wrapped the mountains in a blanket of pristine snow, but inside Eleanor's cottage, warmth and activity flourished. The newly completed family cottages dotted the landscape like gingerbread houses, each providing a safe haven for families reuniting to heal and reconnect. Sophia stood at her favorite window, watching snowflakes dance in the morning light. She wore a new dress that Mrs. Chen had sent her, dark blue with silver snowflakes that matched the scene outside. In her hands, she held a thick envelope addressed to the children who would arrive that afternoon. "Is that your welcome letter, sweetheart?" asked Eleanor, joining her daughter at the window. After their reunion, Sophia had started a tradition of writing personal messages to every child who came to the mountain retreat. "Yes," replied Sophia, carefully sealing the envelope. "I told them about Mrs. Chen, about Sarah Chen's memory quilt, and how sometimes the best families are the ones we build along the way, like pieces of a puzzle finding their place." The cottage had transformed into a warm hub of activity. The converted porch now housed a small team of social workers and counselors, each specially trained to support families during the reunification process. Photos and artwork covered every wall, creating a tapestry of hope and healing. "Mrs. Martin," called one of the counselors, "the UN representatives have arrived for the program review." Eleanor straightened her jacket, another creation by Mrs. Rose Chen, and smiled at her daughter. "Would you like to help me give them a tour, my love? After all, you're our best ambassador." The UN delegation consisted of child welfare experts from around the world, drawn by the success of what they had begun to call the mountain model. They watched with visible emotion as Sophia led them through the welcome hall, explaining each element with wisdom beyond her years. "This is our hope box," she explained, pointing to the handmade creation that now needed to be emptied weekly, due to the volume of messages. Children leave notes for other children who might be afraid to meet their families again, because sometimes it helps to know someone else understands. Michael Thompson joined the tour, bringing updated statistics on the Foundation's progress. "We've successfully reunited over 100 families," he reported, "and our new tracking system has identified another 200 cases we're currently investigating." The delegation was particularly interested in the educational programs Eleanor had implemented. Art therapy, music sessions, and Mrs. Rose Chen's popular sewing classes had proven invaluable in helping children and parents rebuild their bonds. "The key," explained Eleanor, "is creating a space where healing happens naturally through shared experiences and gentle support. Every family's journey is unique, but they all need the same basic elements: time, safety, and understanding." Sophia led the group to one of the new cabins, where a recently reunited family was participating in a cooking class. The mother and daughter worked side by side, preparing traditional dishes from their homeland, while sharing stories and rebuilding their bond through the simple act of creating a meal together. "Food speaks all languages," Sophia announced with the confidence of someone who had witnessed countless reunions. "Mrs. Rose Chen taught me that when she made me soup the night I found her." The delegation took careful notes, clearly moved by the organic and holistic approach to family reunification. One member, wiping tears from her eyes, asked Sophia, "What do you think is the most important part of helping families heal?" Sophia considered the question with her characteristic thoughtfulness. "I think it's remembering that love doesn't disappear, even when people are separated. It just needs help finding its way home." Back in the cottage, Eleanor showed the delegation her comprehensive database system, developed in collaboration with international agencies to help track and verify cases of separated families. The system had already been adopted by several countries, creating a global network of support and investigation. "What started with my daughter's brave act has become something much bigger than we ever imagined," Eleanor explained. "Every reunited family creates waves of hope that reach other separated families, encouraging them to come forward and seek help." As the day progressed, more families arrived at the retreat. Sophia watched from the window as they emerged from warm vehicles into the snowy landscape, their faces a mix of anxiety and hope, She recognized that look. She had worn it herself not long ago. "Mom," she called, "can we make hot chocolate for everyone? With marshmallows like that first night." We were together again. Eleanor hugged her daughter, marveling at how Sophia's heart had grown even more through their experience. "Of course, my love. And maybe we can teach everyone our special song?" The kitchen soon filled with the rich aroma of cocoa as mother and daughter worked together, preparing enough hot chocolate for all the newly arrived families. Outside their window, the snow continued to fall, each flake a small reminder that even the coldest seasons eventually give way to spring. In the welcome hall, Sophia arranged the cups on a tray, making sure each had exactly 3 marshmallows, her signature touch. Soon those cups would warm the hands of frightened children and anxious parents, offering a sweet moment of comfort as they began their journeys of reunification and healing. Spring came early to the mountains that year, bringing with it a wave of new life and renewed hope. The retreat center's garden, carefully planned during the winter months, burst into bloom with plants from around the world, each one representing the homeland of a family that had found healing there. Sophia knelt in the soft soil, helping Eleanor plant a row of sunflowers along the path leading to the welcome center. "These will grow as tall as the hope in people's hearts," she declared, carefully tending the soil around each seed. "Miss Martin," called one of the staff members from the main office. "Sarah Chen is on a video call with big news." Mother and daughter hurried inside, leaving dusty glove prints on the door handle. Sarah's face filled the computer screen, her expression radiant with excitement. Behind her, Mrs. Rose Chen could be seen working at her sewing machine, surrounded by colorful fabrics. "The International Commission on Children's Rights has officially adopted our protocols," Sarah announced. "The mountain model will be implemented in rehabilitation centers worldwide. They're calling it the Sophia Initiative, a comprehensive approach to family reunification and healing." Eleanor squeezed her daughter's shoulders as Sophia's eyes widened. "They named it after me." "Of course they did, my brave girl," Mrs. Chen chimed in, looking up from her sewing machine. "Your courage has shown the world that even the smallest voice can spark the biggest changes." The news kept getting better as Michael Thompson joined the call. "The Foundation's legal team has processed another 50 cases, he reported. "And there's something extraordinary. Some of the families we've helped are now volunteering as mentors for newly reunited families." This was especially meaningful to Sophia, who had seen many families struggle with the challenges of rebuilding trust and connection. "Like Mia and her dad helping new families learn to cook together," she observed proudly, remembering how the once quiet girl had blossomed into a confident young chef. "Speaking of Mia," Eleanor added, "she's starting a support group for kids here at the retreat. She says Sophia inspired her to help other children find their voices." The afternoon brought a special celebration as 3 more families completed their initial reunification period and prepared to begin their new lives together. The community gathered in the garden, where tables were laden with dishes from a dozen different cultures. Sophia moved among the guests, wearing a beautiful spring dress that Mrs. Chen had sewn especially for these occasions. She carried her memory blanket draped over one arm, ready to share her story with anyone who needed encouragement. "Tell us your song again," asked a child who had arrived the week before, still shy but beginning to open up. Sophia smiled and began to sing softly. "Even if the night is dark and long, the dawn will bring a new song." Other voices joined in, children and parents who had learned the simple melody during their stay, each adding their own harmony to the chorus of hope. As the celebration continued, Eleanor pulled Michael aside to share an idea that had been forming. "We need to document these stories," she explained. "Not just the separations and reunions, but the healing process itself. Future generations must understand both the importance of protecting families and the power of redemption." Michael nodded thoughtfully. "The Foundation can fund a comprehensive research project. We'll collaborate with universities, child psychologists, and most importantly, the families themselves. Their experiences will help shape better policies and practices worldwide." Sophia, overhearing this conversation, tugged on her mother's sleeve. "Can I help? I want to tell them about Mrs. Chen's soup, about Isabel's secret rooms. about Mr. Rodriguez's quiet watching and how love is stronger than fear. "Of course you can, my love," Eleanor reassured her. "Your story helped start this journey of healing. It should be part of helping others understand its importance." As evening approached, the families gathered for their traditional sunset ceremony. Each person held a small candle, creating a constellation of light in the growing twilight. Sophia stood between Eleanor and Mia, their flames joining countless others to push back the darkness. "Look, Mom," Sophia whispered, pointing to where the last rays of the sun painted the mountains in a brilliant gold. "The sunflowers will grow this tall, and then even taller, and other families will find their way home." Eleanor looked at her daughter, seeing not just the brave child who had stormed a stage to demand justice, but a young person growing into her role as a bearer of hope for others. "Yes, my darling," she agreed, "and every story will plant new seeds of courage and truth." Around them, the mountain air filled with the sound of different languages sharing a single message. Hope knows no borders, love has no limits, and even the smallest light can illuminate the path home. The Mountain Retreat Center buzzed with activity as preparations for its first international conference reached their final stages. It had been a year since Sophia and Eleanor's reunion, and the Sophia Initiative had grown beyond anyone's wildest expectations. In the main conference hall, once a simple meeting space, Sophia helped arrange name tags for delegates from 30 different countries. Each tag bore a small sunflower symbol, her personal touch that had become the initiative's official logo. "Remember when this was just our living room?" she asked Eleanor, who was nearby reviewing her keynote speech. The house had expanded carefully, keeping its warm heart while growing to meet the needs of their expanding mission. "Exactly," Eleanor smiled, watching her daughter meticulously align each name tag. "And now, look what your courage has created." Mrs. Rose Chen arrived that morning, her arms laden with handmade bags for the delegates. Each bag contained a small quilted notebook cover made from fabric scraps that told stories of hope and reunion. "My little seamstress," she greeted Sophia with a warm hug. "The sewing circles we started have spread to every center. Women in 10 countries are now making memory quilts for reunited families." The conference would showcase the mountain model in action. Families at different stages of their reunion journey had volunteered to share their experiences, demonstrating how the program's gentle, holistic approach helped rebuild bonds broken by separation. Michael Thompson arrived with the latest statistics. 250 successful reunions, he announced proudly, and the Foundation's new transparency protocols have become the industry standard. No other organization wants to risk becoming the next moral lesson of the Beacon Project. Sophia, who was arranging flowers in the welcome area, turned to him with curious eyes. "Any news from your brother?" Michael nodded solemnly. "Richard is fully cooperating with the authorities. His testimony has helped identify dozens of similar schemes worldwide. He's finally using his knowledge to heal rather than harm." The afternoon brought an unexpected visitor, Isabel, who had expanded her hotel network to provide safe transitional spaces for families in various cities. "The UN team sends their regards," she announced. "They're implementing our safety protocols in refugee programs globally." In the garden, now a spacious therapeutic area, Mia led a cooking demonstration for newly arrived families. Her father assisted her, their easy interaction showing how far they had come in their healing journey. "Food is a universal language," Mia explained to her audience, her previous silence replaced by a warm confidence. "Just as Sophia taught me, sometimes the best conversations happen while sharing a meal." Sarah Chen arranged her documentary equipment near the Sunflower Trail. She had spent months collecting stories of reunited families, creating a powerful testament to the possibility of healing and redemption. "Your mother's song," she said to Sophia as she adjusted her camera, "has been translated into 15 languages. Children all over the world sing it in their own language, but the message remains the same. Hope always finds a way." As evening approached, delegates began arriving from around the world. Each brought stories of how the Sophia Initiative had influenced their work with separated families. Social workers from Brazil, psychologists from Japan, legal experts, from Germany, all united by the cry for justice from one little girl. In a quiet moment amid the preparations, Sophia found Eleanor standing in their original living room, now preserved as a memorial space. The walls still held those early photos of reunited families, including their emotional embrace at the mountain airport. "Mom," Sophia said softly, "do you remember when you wrote in your letter that truth is like a seed?" Eleanor wrapped an arm around her daughter's shoulders. "Yes, my love." "Well, I think we've grown an entire forest," Sophia declared, pointing to the photos that now filled every wall. "And every tree helps another seed find the courage to grow." Through the window they could see the delegates arriving, their faces bright with determination. Mr. Rodriguez, now heading an international safety training program, guided them to their accommodations. Each visitor would stay in a family cabin, experiencing firsthand the welcoming environment that had helped heal so many broken bonds. "Sophia, Eleanor," called Mrs. Chen from the conference hall, "the welcome ceremony is about to begin." Mother and daughter exchanged a knowing glance before joining their extended family of healers and helpers. Together they had transformed a simple mountain cottage into a beacon of hope for separated families worldwide. As they walked along the Sunflower Trail, Sophia hummed their special song, her voice carried by the mountain breeze. Around them, the retreat center stood as a testament to the power of a child's love and the endless possibilities that bloom when truth finds fertile ground to grow. The conference hall was filled with an air of anticipation as Eleanor stepped onto the podium. Sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating the diverse faces of delegates from around the world. Sophia sat in the front row, wearing a special dress that combined fabrics from every country represented at the conference, another masterpiece by Mrs. Chen. "1 year ago," Eleanor began, her voice clear and strong, "my daughter's courage changed not only our lives but also those of countless families around the world. She showed us that the smallest voice speaking from the heart can resonate across continents." Screens behind her displayed a sequence of images. Sophia at the Thompson Foundation Gala, the basement apartment of Mrs. Chen, the mountain cottage in its early days, and the growing retreat center it had become. Each photo told a part of their story, culminating in the global movement it had inspired. The Sophia Initiative, Eleanor continued, began with a simple plea from a child. "Give me back my mom." Today, that cry for justice has become a symphony of healing, played in many languages, but with the same melody of hope. In the audience, Mia translated the speech for a group of children who had just arrived from various countries. These young ones would be part of the first International Youth Council, helping shape programs for other children going through the reunification process. Michael Thompson presented the Foundation's expanded mission, his path to redemption evident in every word. "We've learned that true philanthropy isn't about power or control," he explained. "It's about creating spaces where healing can happen naturally, where broken bonds can mend at their own pace." The afternoon sessions showcased success stories from around the globe. An Argentine father described how the mountain model had helped him reconnect with his daughter. A Thai mother shared how Mrs. Chen's sewing circles had given her a way to process trauma while creating something beautiful. Sophia participated in a special panel with other children who had experienced separation and reunion. Sitting in a circle on comfortable cushions, they shared their stories with the delegates in the simple, honest way only children can. "Sometimes," Sophia explained, showing her memory quilt, "the hardest parts of our story become the strongest, parts of who we are, like these pieces of fabric coming together to create something warm and beautiful." Sarah Chen's documentary premiered that evening, featuring interviews with families from every continent. The film captured the universal language of love that transcends borders, cultures, and circumstances. In one particularly moving scene, children from different countries sang Eleanor's song together, their voices weaving a tapestry of hope. Mrs. Rose Chen, watching from the back of the room, wiped away her tears as she saw her son's dream of exposing corruption transform into a global movement for healing and reunion. Isabel held her hand, understanding how deeply personal this victory was. After the screening, Sophia led everyone into the garden for a special ceremony. Each delegate carried a sunflower seed, and together they planted a new border of hope around the expanded retreat center. "These flowers will grow as tall as the mountains," Sophia announced, her voice reaching the gathered crowd, "and their seeds will travel on the wind to help new gardens grow wherever they are needed." Eleanor watched her daughter with pride, remembering the frightened but determined child who had hidden Eleanor's evidence and counted 300 sunsets. That courage now inspired others to speak their truth and reclaim their families. As night fell, the garden glowed with hundreds of small lanterns, each representing a family reunited thanks to the Sophia initiative. The mountain air filled with conversations in dozens of languages, all sharing stories of loss, hope, and healing. "Mum," Sophia whispered, snuggling close to Eleanor as they watched the lanterns flicker, "do you think we'll ever find all the families who need help?" Eleanor kissed her daughter's forehead. "We may not find them all, my love, but thanks to you, they know there is hope. They know they are not alone. And that awareness is itself a light in the darkness." The conference would continue for several more days, but its impact would ripple through the years to come. Each delegate would return home carrying seeds of change, new protocols for family protection, therapeutic techniques for healing trauma, and above all, the understanding that every separated family deserves a chance to reunite. As the evening drew to a close, Sophia led everyone in singing her mother's song one last time. The melody rose into the mountain air, carrying the dreams of countless families still waiting to reunite, and the promise that somewhere, someone was working to bring them home. The weeks following the international conference brought a wave of new energy to the mountain retreat. The delegates had returned to their home countries, carrying not only protocols and procedures, but also the living spirit of hope they had seen in action. Sophia sat at her new desk in the Children's Council room, carefully reading letters from children around the world. The youth advisory committee she had helped create had become an integral part of the Sophia initiative, ensuring that children's voices remained at the heart of every decision. "Listen to this, Mom," called Eleanor, who was reviewing proposals for new retreat centers. "It's from a girl in Paris. She says their new family center has a wall full of memory quilts, just like ours, and every child can add a patch when they reunite with their family." Eleanor smiled, watching her daughter's eyes light up with each letter. "The seeds we planted are blooming everywhere, aren't they?" Mrs. Rose Chen's sewing program had expanded beyond imagination. Video conferences connected quilting circles across continents, where women shared not only quilting techniques, but also stories of healing and hope. Each center developed its own unique style, incorporating local traditions into the memory quilts. "The Bangkok Center sent photos of their latest quilts," Sophia announced, showing her tablet. "They're using silk from old saris, and each design tells a family story through traditional Thai symbols." Michael Thompson arrived that morning with more encouraging news. The transformation of the foundation had inspired other organizations to reevaluate their practices. "Transparency is becoming the new standard," he reported. "Companies are competing to demonstrate their ethical credentials." In the garden, Mia led a group of newly certified youth counselors through their training. Her culinary therapy program had evolved into a comprehensive approach to healing through shared cultural experiences. "Food and stories," she explained to her students, "build bridges between hearts that seem too far apart to reach." Sarah Chen's documentary had ignited a global conversation about family separation. Film festivals around the world were screening it, and universities were incorporating it into their social work programs. But most importantly, it was encouraging more and more families to come forward and seek help. "Another center has opened in Buenos Aires," Isabel announced during their daily video conference. Her network of safe homes had grown into an international support system for families in transition. They're already working with 20 families. Sophia had grown too, not just in height, but in her understanding of how to help others heal. She still carried her memory quilt to welcome new children, but now she also taught them to create their own memory books, encouraging them to document their journeys of reunion and recovery. "You know what's amazing?" said to Eleanor one afternoon, as they walked along the sunflower path grown tall and strong. "Every family has their special song now, just like us. Mia's family sings about cooking together, and the new family from Kenya dances their story instead of singing it. Eleanor wrapped an arm around her daughter's shoulders. That's because you showed them that every story deserves to be told, my love. Every voice deserves to be heard. The mountain retreat had become a training ground for hope. Social workers, therapists and family advocates came from all over the world to learn directly from the mountain model. They lived in family cabins, shared meals with reunited families, and experienced the gentle, organic approach to healing that had proven so effective. We're no longer just reuniting families, Michael observed during a staff meeting. We're changing the way the world thinks about family bonds and children's rights. In the welcome hall, now expanded to accommodate the growing number of visitors, Sophia had created a special exhibit. Photographs of every family reunited through the initiative formed a giant tree, its branches stretching toward the ceiling. At the root of the tree was the original photo of her reunion with Eleanor. Each photo is a leaf, she explained to a group of visiting social workers, and the leaves help the tree grow stronger. This is what Mrs. Chen taught me about healing. It happens little by little, but before you know it, you have an entire forest. The afternoon brought a special celebration as the 100th memory quilt was added to the retreat's collection. This one was different. It contained pieces contributed by families from every center around the world, a tangible symbol of their global healing community. As Sophia helped hang the quilt in its place of honor, she noticed something extraordinary. "Mom, look," she exclaimed. "If you step back, all the pieces form an image of the mountains." Indeed, the international collaboration had unknowingly created a landscape view of their beloved mountain retreat. The coincidence brought tears to Eleanor's eyes, a reminder that no matter how far their influence extended, the heart of their mission remained rooted in the simple truth that had brought them together. "My brave and beautiful girl," Eleanor whispered, holding Sophia close. "You didn't just find your way home. You created a map to help others find their way too." Outside, the sun began to set behind the mountains, painting the sky with colors that reminded Sophia of her first sunset after reuniting with her mother. But now, instead of counting the days until reunion, she counted the growing number of families finding their way back together, their stories adding new verses to the song of hope that had begun with the voice of one child. Another spring arrived, in the mountains, bringing with it a special milestone. The Sophia Initiative celebrated its first full year of global operations, and the changes it had sparked were blooming like the wildflowers that now covered the expanded grounds of the retreat. Sophia paused in the morning light, watching families arrive for the anniversary celebration. Each car winding up the mountain road carried a story of healing, a testament to the power of love and perseverance. She wore a new dress created in collaboration by sewing groups from around the world. Each region had contributed a piece, making it a wearable symbol of their united mission. "The first guests have arrived," she exclaimed excitedly as Mia's car pulled into the parking lot. The once quiet girl had become one of their most effective young advocates, traveling internationally to help establish new centers. Eleanor joined, her daughter at the window, marveling at how much had changed while the essential truth of their mission remained constant. "Do you remember what you told me the day after our reunion?" she asked Sophia. "That the truth is like a seed?" Sophia nodded, smiling at the memory. "And now look at our garden, Mom. It's not just sunflowers. It's a whole world of different flowers, all growing together." The celebration would bring together families, supporters, and advocates from every corner of the globe. Mrs. Chen had arrived early, setting up an elaborate display of memory quilts that told the story of the initiative through fabric and thread. Each quilt represented a different center, but together they created a tapestry of global healing. "My little seamstress," Mrs. Chen greeted Sophia with a warm hug. "Look what arrived this morning." She showed a letter from the World Council for Children's Rights, which officially recognized the Memory Quilt program as a revolutionary therapeutic tool. Michael Thompson arrived with more good news. The reformed practices of the Thompson Foundation had become the gold standard for family-focused philanthropy. "Other organizations are following our lead," he reported proudly. "Transparency and family reunification are becoming universal priorities." In the conference room, Sarah Chen set up a special screening. Her documentary had inspired a series of short films, each focusing on the unique approach of a different healing center. Today, they would premiere a new compilation showcasing the global impact of the Sophia initiative. Your story started. It all, Sarah reminded Sophia, adjusting her camera to capture the day's events. But now it's become everyone's story, a shared song of hope and healing. Isabel coordinated the arrival of international guests, her network of safe homes having evolved into a sophisticated support system. Every week, another city asks for our help to open a family center, she announced. The need has always been there. We just had to show them how to address it. The morning activities began with a special ceremony in the garden. Families from around the world planted new flowers, each variety chosen to represent their cultural heritage. Sophia helped. A young boy from Brazil plant a vibrant tropical flower next to Chinese peonies and African violets. See how beautiful they are together, she told him. Different flowers can share the same garden, just as different stories can share the same hope. In the main hall, Eleanor prepared to address the gathered crowd. The walls now displayed photographs from every center around the world, children reuniting with parents, families healing together, communities uniting to support their most vulnerable members. 1 year ago, Eleanor began, we gathered here to share our dream of global healing. Today we celebrate not only what we've achieved, but what we've learned along the way. She gestured to the members of the Youth Council, sitting proudly in their special section. We've learned that children's voices must lead the way, that healing happens best when we create space for truth to grow naturally, and, most importantly, that love never truly disappears. It just sometimes needs help finding its way home. Sophia joined her mother on the podium, their presence together a living symbol of the initiative's success. When I was searching for my mom, she addressed the audience, I thought I was completely alone, but I found an entire family of helpers, and now no one has to feel alone ever again. The day continued with workshops, shared meals, and countless moments of connection between families who understood each other's journeys. As the sun began to set, everyone gathered in the garden for what had become a tradition, singing Eleanor's song together, each in their own language but united in its message of hope. Under the golden evening light, Sophia looked around at what their story had created. A global community of healing, a support network spanning continents, and above all, proof that love could overcome any distance, any obstacle. "Mum," she whispered, squeezing Eleanor's hand tightly. "Our garden has truly grown into a forest." Eleanor kissed her daughter's forehead, remembering the brave little girl who had dared to speak truth to power. "Yes, my love," she replied. "And the most beautiful part is that it will keep growing long after today's sunset." Around them, the mountain air filled with laughter, music, and conversations in many languages. But beneath all the noise flowed an undercurrent of understanding, that every family deserved the chance to heal, every child deserved to be heard, and every love story deserved its happy ending. The autumn colors painted the mountains in vibrant hues as Sophia prepared for a special presentation. The United Nations Children's Council had invited her to speak about the impact of the Sophia initiative on global family reunification efforts. At 8 years old, she would be the youngest person ever to address their assembly. "Are you nervous?" Eleanor asked, helping her daughter prepare the memory quilt that had become a symbol of their journey. They would travel together to New York, accompanied by Mrs. Rose Chen, who had created a new dress for Sophia's important speech. "A little," Sophia admitted, running her fingers over the familiar patches of the quilt. "But Mia says being nervous just means something matters to you. And helping families is more important than anything else." The mountain retreat had blossomed beyond their wildest dreams. What had started as a single cabin had grown into an international training center with satellite locations on every continent. Yet they had maintained the intimate and welcoming atmosphere that made their approach so effective. "The latest numbers are in," announced Michael during the morning meeting. 1,000 families reunited worldwide through our programs, and the prevention initiatives are working, reports of suspected separations have significantly decreased in countries that have adopted our protocols. Sarah Chen's documentary series had expanded to include stories from every center. She had formed a team of young filmmakers, ensuring that each family's journey was captured with sensitivity and respect. The films had become powerful tools for education and awareness. "Remember when you first sang your mother's song for other children?" Mrs. Rose Chen asked Sophia as she made the final adjustments to her presentation dress. "Now it's being taught in schools as part of their curriculum on family rights." Sophia nodded, remembering how that simple melody had crossed language barriers to become a universal anthem of hope. "Every center has its own version now," she said proudly, "but they all mean the same thing, that love finds its way home." The Youth Council had become a powerful voice for children's rights. Under Sophia's guidance, they had developed programs specifically designed to support young people during the reunification process. Their insights had proven invaluable in shaping policies and practices. The Beijing Center has sent their latest report, shared Isabel during the daily video conference. Their youth-led support groups are showing remarkable results. Children who participate are adjusting to reunification much more quickly. Mia, who now headed the International Culinary Therapy Program, added her update. "We're publishing a cookbook," she announced enthusiastically. "Recipes and stories from families at every center." Sophia wrote the introduction. The introduction had been Sophia's first major writing project, and she had approached it with her characteristic wisdom. "Food is like love," she had written. "It brings people together, heals wounds, and reminds us that we are all part of the Gi." Same human family. As they prepared for their trip to New York, Eleanor watched her daughter review her speech notes. Sophia had insisted on writing it herself, though she had welcomed suggestions from the other children on the Youth Council. "What matters most," Sophia repeated aloud, "isn't just that families are reunited. It's that they learn to trust love again. Because love is patient. It will cross 300 sunsets if it has to. We plant seeds of truth and water them with hope until they grow into forests of healing." The mountain retreat would continue its work under the capable guidance of the trained staff. Mia would oversee the new group of families, while Mrs. Rose Chen's apprentices would keep the sewing. Circles active. Every part of their program had been carefully documented and shared, ensuring that their approach could be replicated anywhere in the world. "Your story started all of this," Eleanor reminded Sophia as they watched the sunset from their favorite window. "Your courage to speak the truth, to seek justice, to believe in the power of love." Sophia leaned into her mother, confident in the bond that had proven stronger than any separation. "But it wasn't just my story, Mom. It was also Mrs. Chen's story and Mia's and everyone who helped us. Now it's everyone's story." Through the window, they could see new families arriving at the retreat, each with their own hopes and fears. The sunflowers Sophia had planted still stood tall along the paths, their faces turned toward the light, just as she had helped so many children turn their faces toward hope. "Tomorrow we fly to New York," Sophia said thoughtfully. "But our real journey started right here when I decided to find you. And it's still going, isn't it? As long as there are families who need to be reunited." Eleanor held her daughter close, marveling at the wisdom shining in her young eyes. "Yes, my love. The journey continues. And thanks to you, no one has to walk alone anymore." The United Nations Assembly Hall was filled with anticipation as Sophia stepped onto the podium. Special platforms had been arranged to allow her to reach the microphone, but her presence filled the room with a power that had nothing to do with physical stature. She wore Mrs. Rose Chen's masterpiece, a dress that incorporated traditional elements from cultures around the world, each piece carefully chosen to represent the global scope of their mission. Her memory quilt rested on one arm, its familiar weight giving her courage. "My name is Sophia Martin," she began, her clear voice reaching every corner of the vast hall. "And I want to tell you about the day I learned that love is stronger than fear." The diplomats and world leaders gathered leaned forward, captivated by this young girl whose actions had sparked a global movement. Eleanor sat in the front row, beside Mrs. Rose Chen, both of their eyes glistening with pride and tears. When I lost my mom, Sophia continued, I thought I was alone. But I discovered something extraordinary. There are helpers everywhere ready to mend broken hearts, like Mrs. Rose Chen, who taught me that every piece of fabric holds a story, like Mia, who showed me that sharing food can build bridges between hearts. She held up her memory quilt, its patches catching the light. This quilt tells my story, but now there are thousands of quilts, telling thousands of stories. Every stitch is a step toward healing. Every patch is a piece of hope. The screens behind her displayed images of Sophia's initiative centers around the world, children reuniting with parents, families healing together, communities coming together to support one another. Each photo represented a victory of love over separation. We learned something important during our mountain retreat, Sophia explained. When you give hope a place to grow, it spreads like wildflowers. Our sunflower path started with just a few seeds, but now there are sunflowers blooming in every center worldwide. Michael Thompson, seated with the Foundation's delegation, nodded in approval. Sophia's initiative had not only transformed his family's legacy, but also reshaped the global approach to family rights and reunification. My mom taught me that truth is like a seed, Sophia continued, her voice growing stronger. It needs brave people to plant it and patient people to help it grow. Today, I see so many brave people in this room, people who can help plant seeds of change in their countries. She shared statistics highlighting their success. Thousands of families reunited, hundreds of child rights advocates trained, dozens of centers established worldwide. But it was her personal touch that moved the assembly most deeply. Every child deserves to feel their parents' heartbeat, she declared. Every parent deserves to hold their child close, and every family deserves a chance to find their way back to love. The silence in the hall was profound, as Sophia led everyone in singing her mother's song. Hundreds of voices joined in different languages, creating a harmony that transcended borders and politics. After the speech, as delegates lined up to pledge their support for expanding the initiative, Eleanor hugged her daughter. You've given hope a voice, my love, she whispered, a voice that will echo for generations. Mrs. Rose Chen approached with joyful news. The United Nations had voted to adopt Sophia's initiative protocols as international standards for family reunification. Your courage has changed the world, little seamstress, she said, adjusting Sophia's dress with trembling hands. Back at their hotel, Sophia received video calls from centers around the world. Mia showed her the latest cooking class in Thailand, where families were learning to rebuild trust by sharing meals. Isabel reported that 3 new countries had requested help establishing retreat centers. See, Mum, Sophia said as they watched the sunset paint the New York skyline. Our garden has truly grown into a forest, and it's still growing. Eleanor kissed her daughter's forehead, remembering the desperate little girl who had stormed a stage to demand justice. That courage had sparked a movement, but it was Sophia's compassion that turned it into a revolution of love. Every sunset brings new hope now, Sophia reflected, clutching her memory quilt. Not just for us, but for every family still waiting to find their way home. As night fell over the city, Sophia and Eleanor stood together by the window, their reflection, showing not just a mother and daughter, but 2 champions of a cause that had changed the world. Behind them, Mrs. Rose Chen began to hum their special song, her melody carrying the promise of countless other families yet to be reunited, countless other hearts yet to heal. The story that had begun with a child's cry for justice had become a global symphony of hope, proving that even the smallest voice could ignite the greatest changes when it spoke from a place of pure love. The mountain air welcomed Sophia and Eleanor home with its familiar, crisp embrace. After the whirlwind of their visit to the United Nations, the sight of their little house, nestled among blooming wildflowers, felt like a warm hug from an old friend. Look, Sophia exclaimed as they climbed the winding path. The sunflowers we planted before we left, they've all bloomed while we were away. Indeed, the entire path leading to the retreat center was lined with tall sunflowers, their bright faces following the afternoon sun. It seemed as though nature itself was celebrating their return and the success of Sophia's speech at the UN. Mia greeted them at the entrance, surrounded by the delightful aromas of a welcome feast she had prepared. "The whole world is talking about your speech," she said, hugging Sophia tightly. "But more importantly, 3 new families arrived while you were away, and they're already beginning to heal." Inside, the retreat center buzzed with its usual warmth and activity. Mrs. Chen, who had flown back early to oversee the sewing circles, was teaching a group of mothers how to create their own memory quilts. The sounds of gentle conversations and softly humming sewing machines filled the air. "Sophia," called a small voice. It was Luca, one of the newest children at the retreat, who had arrived just a few days earlier with his father. During his first days, he had barely whispered. Now he ran toward her, his eyes shining with excitement. "I learned your mom's song while you were away." Sophia dropped her travel bag to give him a proper hug. "Would you like to sing it together?" she offered, and soon their voices joined in the familiar melody that had become a global anthem of hope. Michael Thompson appeared at the door of his office, tablet in hand but forgotten as he watched the scene unfold. "The UN speech has already made an impact," he reported when Sophia and Eleanor joined him later. 7 more countries have signed agreements to implement our programs, but seeing you here with these families, this is where the real magic happens. The evening brought a surprise, a celebration in the garden. The families currently staying at the retreat had worked together to create a special tribute, a living artwork made of painted stones, each with a message of gratitude. They had arranged them in a spiral pattern around the base of Sophia's favorite old pine tree. "See?" explained one mother, pointing to the design. "Like ripples in a pond. That's how your courage has touched all of us, spreading out, reaching more and more lives." Sophia walked the spiral slowly, reading each message. Some were in languages she didn't understand, but their meaning was clear in the carefully painted hearts and stars that accompanied the words. "Mum," she said thoughtfully, reaching the center of the spiral, "do you remember when you wrote in your letter to count 300 sunsets? I think every sunset wasn't just a countdown to finding you, it was also a countdown to finding everyone else." Eleanor wrapped her arms around her daughter, breathing in the sweet mountain air that had become synonymous with healing. "You're right, my love. Every sunset brings another family closer to reunion, another heart closer to healing." As twilight fell over the mountains, families gathered for their traditional evening circle. But that night was special. Representatives from every Sophia Initiative center around the world had sent video messages sharing their sunset celebrations. On the screens set up in the garden, they watched as centers from Tokyo, Rio de Janeiro, Nairobi, and dozens of other cities joined them in song. Each group added their own cultural elements to Eleanor's melody, creating a global symphony of hope and healing. "When I first lost you," Sophia whispered to her mother as they watched the international celebration unfold, "I felt so small and alone, but now look, our family has grown larger than the mountains themselves." Mrs. Rose Chen appeared beside them, carrying a new quilt she had completed during their absence. It told the story of Sophia's speech at the UN, with pieces contributed by sewing circles around the world. At its center, she had stitched the words Sophia had spoken at the podium. "Love finds its way home." "My little seamstress," Mrs. Chen said softly, wrapping the quilt around Sophia's shoulders. "You've helped so many people find their way home, but never forget that your journey began right here, with the bravest thing of all, speaking the truth from your heart." As night fell, the garden lit up with hundreds of small lanterns, each representing a family reunited through the Sophia Initiative. The light they emitted seemed to reach the stars, just as their message of hope had reached across continents. Sophia stood with her mother at their favorite spot, overlooking the valley below. The lights of the retreat center shone like earthly stars, each representing a story of love triumphing over separation, of hope persisting through darkness, of truth blossoming into healing. The morning sun painted the mountains in golden hues as Sophia stood in the welcome hall, preparing for a special ceremony. It had been 2 years since she first interrupted that foundation gala, and today they would celebrate the opening of the 100th Sophia Initiative Center worldwide. The walls of the welcome hall, once adorned only with photos of her reunion with Eleanor, now displayed thousands of images, each telling a story of love reunited, of families made whole again. At the center of it all hung her original memory quilt, surrounded by pieces contributed by centers around the world. "Ready for the ceremony, my brave girl?" Eleanor asked, joining her daughter. She wore one of Mrs. Chen's latest creations, a dress that incorporated fabrics from every continent where their centers operated. "Almost," Sophia replied carefully, arranging fresh sunflowers in vases. "I just want to make sure everything is perfect for the new families arriving today." The retreat center had grown thoughtfully over the years, expanding its facilities while maintaining the intimate, welcoming atmosphere that had made their approach so effective. New family cottages dotted the mountainside, each designed to provide a safe space for healing and reunion. Mia appeared at the door, followed by the aroma of freshly baked bread. "The welcome feast is ready," she announced. "Traditional dishes from every country represented in our centers." Her story of healing through cooking had inspired similar programs worldwide. Mrs. Chen hurried in, carrying her latest masterpiece, a large quilt that would hang in the new International Training Center. It depicted the mountain retreat from above, with golden threads representing the paths that had brought so many families home. "My little seamstress," she said, embracing Sophia, "look what arrived this morning." She handed her a letter from the World Council for Children's Rights, announcing that the Sophia Initiative's methods would be included in their official guidelines for family reunification worldwide. The morning ceremony brought together people from every chapter of their journey. Michael Thompson, whose foundation had been completely transformed, stood beside Sarah Chen as she prepared to premiere her latest documentary, a comprehensive look at how one child's courage had changed the global debate on family rights. Isabel coordinated the arrival of international guests, her network of safe houses having evolved into a sophisticated support system spanning continents. "Every new center," she reported proudly, "becomes a beacon of hope for its community." As families gathered in the garden for the ceremony, Sophia took her place at the podium. She had grown, but her eyes still held the same determination that had driven her to speak truth to power 2 years earlier. "Welcome home," she began, her voice clear and strong. "This is what we say to every family that arrives here, because this place is just that, a home for hope, a garden where love grows stronger than fear." She gestured to the gathered crowd, where newly reunited families sat beside those who had completed their healing journey. "Look around you. Every person here is part of our story. Every smile represents a family that refused to be separated, a love that refused to be silenced." Eleanor joined her daughter at the podium, and together they led everyone in singing their special song. The melody rose into the mountain air in dozens of languages, carrying the same message of hope that had begun with one child's cry for justice. "2 years ago," Sophia continued, "I was on a different stage, asking for my mother back. I was scared and alone, but I learned something powerful. The truth, like love, always finds its way home. And now, thanks to all of you, no child has to make that journey alone." As she spoke, the sun broke through the morning clouds, illuminating the garden where thousands of sunflowers turned their faces toward the light. Each flower represented a reunited family, a healed heart, a truth spoken. "Our work is not done," Sophia declared, her voice filled with purpose. "As long as there are families searching for one another, we will continue to plant seeds of hope. We will continue to sing our song of love. We will continue to light the way home." The ceremony concluded with a new tradition. Each family placed a stone on the spiral path of the garden, adding their story to the ever-growing pattern of healing and hope. Sophia and Eleanor placed their stone at the center, where it all began. As the celebration continued around them, mother and daughter stood together at their favorite window, watching the mountain peaks fade into the twilight. The retreat center glowed with warmth and life, a beacon of hope visible from the valley below. "Mom," Sophia said softly, leaning into her mother's embrace, "do you remember when you wrote that love is patient enough to wait through 300 sunsets?" "I remember, my brave girl. Well, I think love is also strong enough to light the way through every sunset to come, for every family still searching, for every heart still hoping." Eleanor kissed her daughter's forehead, their reflection in the window, showing not just a mother and daughter, but two champions of a cause that had transformed the world. "You're right, my love, and thanks to you that light will never go out." As night fell over the mountains, the stars emerged one by one, their eternal light bearing witness to the truth Sophia had proven. That love, given voice by courage and nurtured by hope, could illuminate even the darkest path home.